Now, before we introduce our keynote speaker for the program this afternoon, I would like you folks to know that we're actually 15 minutes ahead of schedule. So this doesn't mean you get an extra 15 minutes. Otherwise, I would take that time, just so you know. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ken Chavous, noted attorney, author, and national school reform leader. As a former member of the Council of the District of Columbia and chair of the Council's Education Committee, Mr. Chavous was at the forefront of promoting change within the district's public school system. More recently, Mr. Chavous has led the team working with Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal that advocated for and recently passed scholarship program in New Orleans. As a result of that legislation, nearly 2,000 students are now attending private schools of their choice in the New Orleans parish. And Mr. Chavous is also living proof that education is not a partisan issue. He was a founder of Democrats for Education Reform and is the current chairman of the Black Alliance for Educational Options and has served as the top education advisor to President Barack Obama. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the podium Mr. Ken Chavous.
Thank you, my man.
Oh, no, my pleasure.
All right, thank you all very much. To Governor Daniels and our Lieutenant Governor, and to the platform guests, and to others, like my good friend Teresa Lovers, who I haven't seen in a while, and fellow Bayo board member Jackie Sissel. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right. This is indeed a special day for me. I give speeches all over the country, but I am back home, and I am so immensely proud of my Hoosier roots today to be honored to ask to give this address today. It means a lot. See, I remember as a boy in April of 1968 when my mother took me to a park on the east side of town to hear presidential candidate Bobby Kennedy. I remember in the rain having Bobby Kennedy share with us the news that Dr. King had been assassinated. It was a surreal night for me to be standing there in the rain and hear the brother of a slain president announce that our leader had been killed. Dr. King is a personal hero, and his life work does speak for itself. And while we have celebrations like this here and all over the country, I think as we unpack the life of Dr. King, and bear with me, it is important for us to demythologize his life at that time. See, with people like King, George Washington, Abe Lincoln, and others, it's easy to glamorize their existence when you look back. It's easy to forget that they were living at a time that required leadership, and as Governor Daniels knows, leadership ain't easy, y'all. Indeed, of all the traits that Dr. King had that I admire, and there are many, I begin with the trait that our governor just alluded to. Dr. King had a deep and abiding faith in the good Lord above, and that steeled him during the times when he was facing criticism beyond anyone else. He had a steadfast commitment to service, and isn't it beautiful that part of his legacy is that the King holiday is known as a day of service in his memory. But the thing I want to talk with you about today is Dr. King's courage and willingness to challenge the status quo. Because, see, that's where the mythology and the reality need to be reconciled. See, Dr. King had a dream, but Dr. King would fight for the rights of others. And he had the courage to stand up to the status quo. So in the next few minutes, in the true spirit of Dr. King and his legacy, I am going to challenge some of your conventional thinking about education in America. And if I do my job, some of you are going to squirm a little bit and be a little upset with your homeboy. See, I'm not a historian, but as a student of history, I can't help but wonder what Dr. King would say about the state of education today. Clarence B. Jones, his longtime attorney and personal friend who helped him write the I Have a Dream speech, wrote a book a couple years ago saying, "What would Martin say?" where he threw out there, really for conversation, what Dr. King's views would be on the relevant issues of today. So he, being one of the King's closest advisors, talked about what he think King would say about immigration, what he would say about affirmative action. And I talked to Clarence Jones because he avoided this issue. I said, what about education? What do you think Dr. King would say today about the state of education, particularly as it affects those he was most concerned about, those from less fortunate communities? Attorney Jones said to me, Dr. King would be appalled at the state of education today, and he would be hurt that nearly 60 years after Brown versus Board of Education, we still have segregated schools, and they're worse than what they were before. He would be appalled at the fact that when the achievement gap was first noted 30 years ago between low-income children of color and their white counterparts, that gap 30 years later is growing. He would be appalled that when you talk about children who come from low-income families in this country, black, white, brown, yellow, it doesn't matter, when compared to their counterparts, children who come from families of means, that gap is growing. He will be appalled that when you compare all American school-aged children with other school-aged children from industrialized nations around the world, that gap is growing. And what he would say is, why? Why, after all my hard work, why, after all that we've accomplished over the past 30 years, why is it that we still can't ensure that each and every American child has equal access to a high-quality education? Why is that? Why is it that every school day, 7,000 children drop out of school? That's 1.2 million children drop out of school every school day of the year. That's over 3 million since President Obama took office. What is really sad is we know what works. Any good teacher knows all children can learn. It's not a product of zip code or the accident of birth. If you put high standards in front of a child, they're going to learn. If you have accountability in front of teachers, those teachers will teach. If you put the expectations out there, people will rise to the expectations you put in front of them. Right now, we live in a society where excuses are commonplace. Dumbing down is commonplace. So much so that they at McDonald's will put the pictures of the food on the cash register because the kids can't count and can't read. What needs to happen when you talk about why there's no progress, we need to be fundamentally honest about the real issue of courage. See, there's problems with the bureaucracy. There's problems with this notion of dumbing down. But the real reason why we can't fix what's going on is we don't have the courage to say and do what's right for our children. That's the real issue. When Dr. King wrote his famous letter from Birmingham jail, and remember the context at the time, he went to jail in Birmingham to protest the inequalities in that state. And he wrote his letter in response to being chastised by members of the white clergy for saying, you don't know your place, you shouldn't be doing this. And Dr. King gave those famous words, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And yes, I do have a right and a duty, even though I live in Atlanta, to speak out against injustice in Birmingham. Even in 1961, when you talk about challenging authority, looking back, people knew the ties that the African American establishment had with the labor community. But if you look back in 1961, in a speech that Dr. King gave before the AFL-CIO and George Meany, when labor at the time was hesitant to get involved to help the cause. They didn't want to get their hands dirty on this civil rights issue. And Dr. King said, justice too long delayed is justice denied. Labor, you need to step up and support us in this fight. So where is today's courage? The courage to speak honestly about why kids aren't learning and to do something about it. And on that note, I applaud Governor Daniels for promoting parental choice in this state. I'm proud that there are options for children with needs in this state, and I think he should be recognized for his contributions.